Just a quick update on my Fuji X-T4. You can see I have a black one now. The one, if you look at that previous video I posted about the power problem, it would not turn on when you would turn on the power switch. So you turn the power switch on and nothing would happen. There's Bert. So, you know, you turn the power on, you would see nothing on the display, nothing on the LCD or the EVF, nothing. And the only way to recover it was to flip it over and take the battery out and put it back in, and then everything would be perfectly fine. And that would happen about anywhere from 2 to 5 times throughout the day when I was away on vacation using the camera. So I still had about 2 weeks of return time or exchange time from B&H Photo where I bought it from. So I thought I would just go ahead and exchange it for another one, but unfortunately they didn't have the silver, so I just have black. And that whole ordeal, just, you know, with the power problem and then trying to get it exchanged, it's just been very frustrating. Because the one that I actually sent back, it's actually still sitting in Trenton, New Jersey. It was supposed to be delivered Monday. I got there like 5 a.m. Monday, and it was supposed to be delivered that day, but it's just been sitting there. I keep calling FedEx, and they keep telling me, well, you know, we don't really know. It's just busy there. It's just kind of crazy. So I went ahead and bought another one, and B&H said they would just credit me back to the same payment source and everything would even out. So I ended up with a black one because they don't have any silver ones. But the other thing is, it's a little frustrating. Right before I sent it, or probably the day I sent it, I didn't check the Fuji website because I kept thinking this might be a firmware problem because, you know, it behaves just fine as soon as you take the battery out and put it back in. And I thought, well, maybe it's just some firmware glitch. And it's not a problem where the camera's going to sleep and you're in the on position. You let it go to sleep and you try to press the shutter button to wake it up, and it won't wake up. That's not the problem. It's just the problem was the power switch. Just turning it on would not turn the camera on. Excuse me. So, lo and behold, after I sent it out, here comes an update from Fuji, a firmware update. It's like 1.02, I think it is. There's also a firmware update for the 16 to 80 millimeter lens. I think the improvements they said improves the stabilization. Anyway, so that firmware update, when you look at the notes for the X-T4, the new update, it says something about a power problem, you know, in the sleep where it wouldn't recover from the sleep mode. But again, even though my problem was using the power switch on and off, I still think that may have been related, and I probably could have avoided if I just waited for another firmware update, but you never know when there's going to come. So anyway, I have a black one now. I would have rather kept the silver one because I think it actually, that silver X-T4, it's not like the really super bright silver they used to have like on the X100 and like an X-T3. The silver that they had on the X-T4, it's more of a, it's not really like that graphite version they had. I think there was a special edition graphite XT1, but it's a little bit lighter than that, and I think it still looked really classy. But anyway, I've got a all black one now, and so once I get caught up with everything and make my notes, I'll go ahead and make another video because I want to talk about some things like being able to set the front command dial for aperture control. Because if you remember, in the older versions of the X-T1, X-T2, and I don't know if the X-T3 was that way. It's probably same as X-T4 now. But there is a way actually now to set the front command dial. I think you probably use the rear if you want to, as aperture control. And I don't like to use the aperture ring because I find myself accidentally turning it too much. And just by the way, side note, the 16-80 millimeter, turning this aperture ring is much stiffer now, and I like that because you're not actually accidentally changing it as you have your hand under the lens holding the camera, supporting it. You know, sometimes in the past, like an 18 to 55 millimeter lens, I'd find myself accidentally changing the aperture, and that's one of the reasons I didn't want to use it. The other thing is the automatic aperture control is right next to f/22. Normally, if I'm wanting to switch from automatic to aperture priority, I'd want f4 to be right next to the auto, because I don't want to have to like spin all the way over to f4, because that's normally where I'd be, somewhere at f4, f5.6, whatever. So, and for me, it's just easier to hold on to the camera, and just your finger's already right there. I know that people prefer to use the ring, but I don't, and so people argue with me all day about that, you know, the Fuji lovers, and I like Fuji, but I like Nikon too, and I really still believe that the DSLR style of changing exposure compensation, like on the rear or front dial, and aperture on the rear or front, however you want to have them arranged, is a lot easier than having to reach up here and try to turn the exposure compensation on top of the camera. And like I mentioned about the aperture ring, I think it's less prone to problems and actually quicker accidental changes, and quicker if you just use the front dial or the rear, whichever one you prefer. So I have the front is aperture control, super easy to change it now, and the rear is my exposure compensation. You know, you have to have the dial here and C to do that, and make sure you set all that in the menu. But I'll kind of go over that. Here comes Bert again. Bert, what are you doing? All right. So anyway, yeah, just have that in C. So I pretty much have everything up here in A. The shutter priority, A, shutter control, shutter speed, and the auto ISO and auto, because I use auto ISO. I have my 3 banks set to, you know, you've got auto ISO 1, 2, and 3, and I have one set to max out at 400 with slow shutter speed of 1/15, and the second one is maxed out at 800 with a shutter speed of 1/15 as a minimum shutter speed, and the third one I think is my kind of like high ISO, probably 6400, and I think still 15th. And I have it set to 1/15 second because I'm not doing a lot of action stuff. Usually my subjects are mostly still, and if I need to increase the shutter speed, I will do that when I need to. But yeah, so I'm really happy with the way I can set up the Fuji cameras now, the X-T4, and I think probably the X-T3 is the same. I don't know, but I'm assuming it's the same. You know, I set all the controls the way I want to, and you know, of course, that kind of makes these dials up here mostly useless. But if I ever do need to quickly change into a specific ISO or a specific shutter speed, I can still do that quickly with the dials. And of course, you have all the, you know, your joystick and so on. I'll go over all that more later on once I get my thoughts together, my notes. But one thing I wanted to mention specifically was this being able to set the aperture control on one of the command dials, because to me, at first that was not really obvious how to do that. You know, I was thinking, can't do it. It's just like the older ones. The older ones, you if you had an aperture ring, you were forced to use the aperture ring. But if you had one of those XC lenses, one of the cheaper lenses that did not have an aperture ring, then you would have to use the command dial, and they would let you do that. But now, even if you have an aperture ring on the lens, you can still set your aperture control on the dial. It makes it a lot easier, in my opinion. You know, that's the beauty of this. You can set it up any way you want to. You know, there's not any right or wrong ways. Whatever you like and what works well for you. But now I'll stop there, and yeah, I'm glad I have my camera back now. I was just unfortunate about that power problem, and like I said, I think it probably was a firmware issue. I'm not really sure, but that's just my assumption based on that latest firmware update I saw and how the camera's behaving. Just kind of a bummer now that I had to go back to a black one. I usually buy black anyway, but in this case I would have preferred to keep the silver because I think it looks better. All right, so I'll stop here for now, and try to get another video up, you know, within a week or so after I have a little more time and write down some notes about the settings and how to do all that. Thank you. Goodbye.